We expect he will touch on a range of issues, including the controversial Iran nuclear deal. In fact, what you're seeing right now is the Palestinian leadership, a boss there. We're expecting Iran to also take the lectern. So Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's meeting yesterday with President Obama will likely be the pair's last meeting while Mr. Obama is still in the White House. Things were reportedly tense between the two men behind closed doors as they were talking about things like the Iran nuclear deal and Israeli settlement. So knowing that Iran is coming up makes news as well. We will be watching it all at the UN, bringing the Prime Minister's speech live when Netanyahu begins.
Fox News alert, a state of emergency. Charlotte ignites in a second night of chaos after protests over the fatal police shooting of a black man, again turning violent. Shots fired. A demonstrator critically injured. The governor calling in the National Guard to try to restore order there. This is Outnumbered. I'm Sandra Smith. Here today is Harris Faulkner, host of Kennedy on Fox Business. Kennedy is here. Also from FBN, the co-host of After the Bell, Melissa Francis. And today's #OneLuckyGuy, Steve Hilton. He was director of strategy for the former British Prime Minister David Cameron. And he's now CEO of CrowdPack, a Silicon Valley political tech startup. And Steve, you are outnumbered, sir. Good to have you here.
It's so great to be here.
Oh, this is so exciting.
I'm such a fan of this show. I watch it every morning when I can in California, where I live now.
That's awesome, because we're a morning show on the West Coast.
That's right.
It was
exactly.
very clever of you to say that, by the way.
Well,
Extra points.
I'm just telling you how I feel about it.
Well, listen, there is
very exciting
so much going on. It's going to be great to get your perspective on all these happenings. Let's begin with the state of emergency just declared in Charlotte, North Carolina, following a second night of violent protests there. One person said to be on life support after being shot by another civilian during the unrest. And at least 4 cops suffering non-life-threatening injuries. All this after Tuesday's shooting of Keith Scott, by a black police officer, saying the 43-year-old was armed and refused to drop his weapon, the police say. His family saying he was reading a book and that the gun was planted by the cops. In a Kelly Fowle exclusive, the city's chief of police strenuously refuting those allegations.
I have to deal in the truth. I have to deal in facts. So the version that you hear from me is based on evidence. It's based on testimony that we get from witnesses and the officers there, and it's corroborated with the evidence that we gathered there on the scenes. I'm not fabricating anything. I have nothing to gain for doing something like that. We're just going to stand by the facts that we know.
Jonathan Siri is live from Charlotte with the latest happening there. Jonathan?
Yeah, good afternoon. Right now I'm standing in front of a family-owned variety store. You can see police officers standing guard trying to prevent more looting. This store was hit overnight. In fact, we have some video to show you from overnight of when looters broke into the store during the overnight protests. The owners and employees were not here at the store. In fact, they had closed early because of the protests, so fortunately no one inside was injured. However, they tell us that the looters got away with most items of value. Police came in today, and after investigating the looting, they actually helped the store owners begin to clean up, begin to pick up the pieces. So the police here serving multiple tasks. Police are also trying to determine, they're conducting an internal investigation into the police-involved shooting that set off all of these protests on Tuesday. As you mentioned in the introduction, there are very different stories emerging. You have a version by some of the protesters, and then you have the version of the police. Well, police say that body cams and dashboard cams, the totality of that evidence corroborates their story that officers were being threatened by this man that they shot, and that it was not an unprovoked shooting. And they are not releasing this video to the general public because they say additional agencies, including the FBI, may join in the investigation. However, they do anticipate being able to grant a request from the family of the man who was shot to view the video. Listen to this soundbite from the chief.
We're going to release it. Ultimately, as I said before, our practice has been not to release, but to allow for the party who feels they've been mistreated in any way to see that. So right now what we're going to do is honor a request that has been made with the family, because it's still in my purview to do so. But beyond that, it will be much more collaborative in what I can release.
At this point, city leaders say there is no reason to call for a curfew, no reason to shut down the city for business. The city is still open for business, but they are urging for calm. They're urging the protests to remain peaceful, and they're hoping that tonight will not be a repeat of what happened here in Charlotte over the 2 previous nights. Back to you guys.
All right, Jonathan Siri, thank you for the update. Both presidential candidates are reacting to the shooting and the protests happening there. Just moments ago, Donald Trump saying reducing crime would be a top priority of his administration. And he praised former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani's policies like stop and frisk.
The policies he put into place ultimately brought down crime by 76% and murder in New York by 84%. Think of how many families these policies saved from the worst heartache imaginable. We need a national anti-crime agenda to make our cities safe again. We have to make our cities safe again.
Yesterday, he told Sean Hannity that he would call for a nationwide stop and frisk policy. Listen.
I would do stop and frisk. I think you have to. We did it in New York. It worked incredibly well. And you have to be proactive. And, you know, you really help people sort of change their mind automatically. You understand. You have to have, in my opinion, I see what's going on here. I see what's going on in Chicago. I think stop and frisk. In New York City, it was so incredible the way it worked. Now, we had a very good mayor, but New York City was incredible the way that worked. So I think that would be one step you could do.
Meantime, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager says she plans to develop national standards for police to prevent similar situations while investing in community policing. Here's the Democratic nominee.
We are safer when communities respect the police and police respect communities. I know I don't have all the answers. I don't know anyone who does. But this is certain. Too many people have lost their lives who shouldn't have. We need to come together, work together, white, black, Latino, Asian, all of us, to turn the tide, stop the violence, build the trust.
So both candidates, Steve, have put forward proposals in the wake of Charlotte. What do you make of them? What do we just laid them out?
Well, the first thing I think is that going national with this is not necessarily, I think, the right way to go. But before any discussion of this, I think it's really important for us all to say that policing is a really tough job. It's frightening for the police officers who put themselves at risk on our behalf. And I know that's a cliche, but we've got to keep reminding ourselves of that, even as we also say that it's evident now that a large group of people in our country are frightened of the police. And that is something that we can't just dismiss. We can't just fight back with statistics. We have to understand where that comes from. And I think the real answer here is actually the notion of community policing, but delivered not just through vague phrases like we heard there from Clinton, but it actually set out by Bill Bratton. Bill Bratton, who we all remember from New York, actually wrote a piece the other day in the New York Times that very clearly set out a plan for how you really build those bonds of trust between communities and the police. And it's very practical stuff. It's police officers spending time in the neighborhoods where they have to operate. And that just doesn't happen enough. And I think that the idea that you can impose this nationally,
which they're both talking about,
I just think that's almost what's gone wrong in a whole range of areas of policy where things have become too centralized, and the idea that big bureaucracies in Washington can solve every problem around the country. I think that's kind of what's gone wrong with a lot of areas of policy.
You're absolutely right. And when you talk about that one-size-fits-all nationalistic nannying policy, to me it smacks of militarization. And, you know, that's one thing that the rational people in these communities are actually protesting against, is what they see as the militarization of police. You don't see those people, the ones who are out looting, the ones who are out throwing photographers into a fire, the ones who are shooting each other. Those are not the ones who are having the discussion, and it's a discussion that absolutely has to be had. And you're absolutely right. You know, we talk about things like Common Core, these one-size-fits-all strategies, and when both candidates are saying the same thing, impose a national set of standards, that to me sounds like militarization.
Important to point out that Donald Trump was criticized for calling that, for that national stop and risk policy. He sort of walked those comments back, as you just heard, saying he was talking about Chicago, really.
Yeah, I mean, he did. He tried to emphasize the fact that he's talking about Chicago, where things have been very out of control in this one area specifically where police don't even really want to go. But, I mean, let's not forget that it was just last weekend that we had bombs exploding in New York, and it was the men in blue that went out and protected us from what was going on all around us when we had so much fear and had no idea where the next bomb was going to be. They're the ones that ran into the danger, and yet here they're being criticized. You know, I mean, nobody is completely in the right on this issue, but to see it get so far out of control, Charlotte's a beautiful city. Now it's trashed. But everyone who had those businesses, now they've lost their jobs and their income.
Sorry, but that reminds me of something I think that's gone wrong that police officers would agree with, which is that they get too much bureaucracy imposed on them that actually gets in the way of them.
Gotta let them do their
job. That's a great point.
Which is just be there with the people that they're protecting.
Yes, and support them.
Stop. I worry that all these proposals will end up with more of that, not less.
Well, and what we've seen in Chicago just in the last couple of days is they are now cozying up to the idea of a de-escalation program for police officers. And what would that look like exactly when they have so many dozens of murders each weekend across the summer? It's just been a very bloody summer. I'm just calling it what it is.
They talked about that in New York. Remember?
Yeah,
you know, they were asking NYPD officers to act as psychologists.
Right. Yeah, and we're putting so much on them. We're asking them to, you know, get to a scene but then kind of hold back. But what's interesting about what you said about Bratton, I believe he's working with Hillary Clinton through one of her subsidiaries, right? So he might be able to give her some of that information.
Yeah.
I'll tell you where the conversation has not gone. A black police officer kills a black man. And that's not the first time it's happened. So are we now talking about a broader issue of abuse of power by some bad apples in these police departments? And isn't it incumbent upon all of us, no matter what we look like, to find those people, whomever they are, because then everybody's a target. The weakest among us will always be a target of those who abuse power.
I think that's right, and I completely agree. And there's another aspect to what you said, which is that we're putting too much on them. We're also expecting the police to pick up the pieces of the economic and social failure in so many communities around the country. It's not their job to solve these problems that have been with us for so long.
And to act as social workers. And if you talk to police officers, if you do a ride-along, that's essentially what they're being tasked with. And, you know, to your point, you make a really good point, because we have these two massive events within the course of just a couple of days, and they involve law enforcement. And we have to ask ourselves, as a society, no matter where you live, no matter what your background, what do you expect from law enforcement? And I think most people would agree, you know, please help keep us safe from terrorism.
Equally as important, what do they expect from us? So when you get stopped by a police officer, are people teaching their children, no matter what they look like, what economic status they are, when a police officer tells you to do something, and you want to get through that moment and have recourse perhaps at a due time, do it.
So, Steve, let me ask you, are we having the right conversations then? I mean, both candidates are talking about doing something at the national level, which you say you're against. But Hillary Clinton said she's planning on these national standards for police intended to prevent situations like this. But she talks about restoring bonds between communities and law enforcement and investing in community policing. Is there any one proposal from the candidates that you're hearing that you favor more?
Not really. I think that those are fine words. I kind of agree with those words. But then how's it going to happen? I think the idea that you can make that happen from Washington with a national policy is ridiculous and actually counterproductive. That's why I point to what Bratton wrote, because he has done it in multiple cities across America, and he set out a very pragmatic, practical plan for making it happen. But I think the right way is for each police force to look at that and say, well, how can we do that kind of thing in our area? Not to have it imposed on them from politicians miles away who don't understand the needs of that community.
Great perspective. All right, thank you. New Fox News polling, meanwhile, showing Donald Trump pulling ahead in 3 key battleground states, as another poll shows Hillary Clinton's lead shrinking nationally. Should her campaign be worried? Plus, we're now just days away from the start of the White House's plan to bring in 110,000 more refugees. But one major state threatening to drop out of the resettlement program as leaders sound the alarm about the security threat. And after the show, you can join our live chat by clicking on the Overtime tab at foxnews.com/outnumbered, or go to facebook.com/outnumberedFNC. Maybe some fun facts about Steve that we'll share with you. And of course, you can tweet us. See you there.
Fox News Alert, want to tell you what we're watching there on the left of your screen. The Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, going to step up to the lectern to talk about something that has to do with mail fraud schemes, and she's putting forth a campaign. But ahead of those remarks there from the Department of Justice, she's expected to talk about what's happened in Charlotte and what her vision is for going forth, how involved she may be in all of what's going on in terms of adjudicating any cases that may be there. We know that one person was shot last night by a civilian, we're told, among the protesters, and some things that others are calling what looks like rioting, and definitely some looting and a lot of violence. So Loretta Lynch expected to step up to the lectern and tell us about that ahead of her remarks with the mass mail scheme that is a global initiative that she's working on. We'll watch for that, bring you the news out of that when it happens. A close race, just 50 days from Election Day. And now, actually less than that. And now, new Fox News polling shows Donald Trump is leading Hillary Clinton in 3 key battleground states. In a two-way race, Trump now ahead by 5 points among likely voters in Ohio, up 4 points in Nevada, 5 points in North Carolina, and a new NBC News Wall Street Journal poll shows Hillary Clinton is leading nationally by just 6 points among likely voters. That's down from a lead of 9 among registered voters last month. This could point to trouble, since likely voters are, well, more likely to actually go to the polls. That's why they called them that. And now Clinton is openly asking why she does not have much bigger leads in the polling. Here's part of what she told labor leaders during a video conference yesterday.
Now, having said all this, why aren't I 50 points ahead, you might ask? Well, the choice for working families has never been clearer. I need your help to get Donald Trump's record out to everybody. Nobody should be fooled.
Wow.
Wow.
Okay.
What's up with
Video
that?
conferencing is difficult because it's just you and the camera.
You got to raise the energy levels.
And so you're trying to like pump up the energy. I would just preface it by saying that.
You know, like an ostrich with a belt around its neck.
As you're watching this race, Steve, I'm just curious to get your point. Everybody says they tighten.
Yeah.
But this is getting uncomfortable, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is the complete way in which on the left they can't understand it. They can't believe this is happening. When you talk to Democrats and think, what is going on? How could they possibly support him? And how could it be that it's so close? And I think that there was some new information published last week that gives us a really important clue into what's going on. So last week we had new data published on incomes. And a lot of people were celebrating because for the first time in many years, incomes went up. And it's true that they went up last year. But also in that same data was the fact that the median income of America was lower than in 1999. What that means in plain English is that half of all Americans, 50%, earn less today than in 1999.
Wow.
So we've had 8 years of Bush, 8 years of Obama, and they're earning less. And that's what's going on here, because people are saying it doesn't matter who you vote for the last few years. Nothing's got better for me. The rich have got richer. We might as well try anything. And Trump looks like he's an outsider that might actually change things.
Yeah,
and I think that is what's going on.
Fascinating. Melissa?
In addition to that, if you look underneath those numbers that we showed you at the top, it's the independents where he's really killing her. And I was surprised by this. I mean, the contrast is stark. You look in Nevada, he leads independents 42% over 23, 21 points.
Yeah.
Look also in Ohio, he's up by 20 points among independents. And in North Carolina, he's up by 14 points among independents. Those are the swing voters. Those are the people, like you said, who are saying, you know what? I don't care which party's in. They're both screwing me.
Yes.
Then my question would be about the intensity. What do we know about independent voters? Because I think you kind of coined a phrase here, we'll try anything. Will they try actually going to the polls?
Well, I think that there's a lot of, well, it's clear that there's much more enthusiasm on Trump's side. I think that they will, because they're so frustrated. We actually saw this in the Brexit vote not long ago in the UK, where all the models and the data that the people who were campaigning to stay in the EU were using missed out on a whole group of voters who are just so alienated from the whole thing because they don't think anything ever changes, who did show up because they thought, finally, here's something that actually might make a difference, and we can really
Oh my gosh,
have
you
a say.
just hit on something else, Kennedy, and I was having a dinner conversation with a complete stranger who was seated next to me yesterday.
Yeah, that's how you do it.
He said, which stranger, right? Just
What is
that
that?
stranger danger card. No, he was a very nice man. But we were talking about which polling you trust, and he said, well, I'm an independent. I don't think you should trust any of it because I don't do polls. I'm independent. I'm going to poll.
But that's what we have right now. Yeah. But that's what we have right now. And when you go, fair point on the economy. Are people better off now than they were 8 years ago? Or you said
16 years.
16 years ago, 1999. That's unbelievable information. But how much of this is about national security and our fears over whether or not we're safe here at home? I mean, look at the happenings just in recent weeks and the tightening that we're seeing in these polls.
I think that's right. I think that a really, really big part of why people vote the way they do is an instinctive sense of who is the stronger candidate. I think strength is just a really big factor in elections and in the way people judge candidates. And I do think that there's something about the way Trump presents himself, and people can disagree with the content of what he says, but just the way he comes over does project a certain strength. And I think people respond to that at a time when they're frightened of what's going on in the world and at home.
Quickly, I think the economy is foundational for people. I think that is the one issue that doesn't change, certainly in this election. And then you have the other things that we fixate on. Some of them are momentary, like scandals, and others, like national security, they are important, but still, I think the bottom line is the economy. And the thing I will say about Hillary Clinton is she still has not figured out how to talk to independent voters. And that's why she's hemorrhaging millennials. They are finding Gary Johnson and Jill Stein to be more attractive candidates for them, and she can't hold on to a constituency that should be naturally hers. So between millennials and independents, she's kind of tone deaf.
Well,
Screaming into that video camera.
I want to remind everybody, in case they're just tuning in, former strategic advisor to Prime Minister David Cameron, when you talk about Brexit, you know what you're talking about.
Yes, and he didn't like the way I was talking about it because we ended up on different sides.
What did you think of his comparison to Brexit and this election and how everybody thought it was going to go one way and it certainly didn't? Is that a fair comparison?
I think it is, because I think, funnily enough, it's the same kind of underlying sense that people have, which is they're so sick of these politicians who make promises and nothing really changes in their lives, and they feel that there's a group at the centre, the kind of elite, the technocrats, the bureaucrats, who run things irrespective of what happens in elections, and they're really angry about it. They've had it for decades, and that's what's being expressed, and I think that's the comparison between the two.
Steve Hilton, it's great to have you.
Great to be here.
Yeah, get that perspective, right? New details coming in on the suspect accused of planting bombs around New York City and New Jersey. The discoveries inside his blood-soaked notebook, the journal that they found on him. Brand new video just in from the scene of the New York City bombing. And the first presidential debate, now just 4 days away. Why Hillary Clinton's campaign says it is afraid the moderators will, quote, lower the bar for Donald Trump. We're coming right back. Fox News Alert want to show you this brand new surveillance video just released in the aftermath of the bomb that went off in New York City, particularly the Chelsea neighborhood. That was this past weekend. A nearby store caught different angles of people stumbling than what we've seen. Wow. Then sprinting away from that explosion as fast as they could. Can you imagine?
I can't imagine.
We're also getting a look at the blood-soaked journal that was found on Ahmed Khan Rahami when he was captured. And the writings really go from those who he was sympathizing with, like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, to maybe some of his own plans. He says he was inspired to carry it out, and it's in those words about the attack here. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is here. Catherine, you and I were together as this was breaking yesterday, and we got those 8 or 9 images into Fox News. You've been able to drill down on more. What have you learned?
That's right. Here's the handwritten notes recovered by investigators are riddled with bullet holes and soaked in blood. And these exclusive images obtained by Fox News show the suspect Rahami was amped up on jihadist propaganda. He was reading the who's who of the terrorist world, and he was a consumer of the violence peddled by Al-Qaeda and ISIS. The notes read like a martyrdom statement. On this page, Rahami appears to make a direct reference to the Marine charity run in New Jersey Saturday, where a pipe bomb detonated prematurely. He writes that there will be bombs and pressure cookers in the streets where they plan to race. And to justify the murder of so-called non-believers, Rahami writes about the ISIS leader Adnani, who called for the Islamic State's followers to kill in their homes. Based on those writings, Rahami is an ISIS sympathizer. And here's the House chairman of the Homeland Security Committee.
This is a new era of terror. As the commissioner testified, the message coming out of Raqqa, Syria has changed and evolved from come to Syria and join the fight to now kill where you are.
But this 13-page criminal complaint that lays out the evidence against him has a lot of information about his al-Qaeda leanings, but there is nothing about ISIS effectively whitewashing this Islamic State connection. And we're also learning this morning that his wife left the U.S. in June. That's the same month Rahami began buying bomb parts online. Asia Rahami is now back in the U.S., and we're told she is cooperating, though the extent of which is not clear, Harris.
Yeah, and I thought his mother also had gone as well. Catherine Herridge, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, well, with just 4 days until the first presidential debate, the candidates taking starkly different approaches to how they will prepare. Unlike Donald Trump, who's taking a more low-key approach and plans to campaign through Saturday, Hillary Clinton clearing her schedule of any campaign events before Monday's big showdown as she hunkers down with her strategist and briefing books. This as her campaign says it fears debate moderators will lower the bar for the GOP nominee and that it has happened in the past. Clinton's communications chief, Jennifer Palmieri.
I understand that the press have a difficulty in dealing with a very unconventional candidate, as I would describe, but I think you can't lower the bar in your questions in terms of how difficult they are, how much they expect in terms of the candidate's knowledge, or being able to answer questions about their plans, or being able to answer questions about how they would approach different problems. You can't lower the bar because their own experience and their own policies don't meet the bar of hers, and that's what we're concerned about.
Do you think that that's a possibility? Let's talk about that. Meantime, Team Trump mocking the links Hillary is going to in preparing for Monday's debate. A campaign memo obtained by the Wall Street Journal saying Mr. Trump won't be spending hours in the film room like an NFL player, but will be himself at the debate. And in what could be a first, Trump seeking debate advice from his supporters in an online survey. Among the questions, should he refer to Clinton as Crooked Hillary during that debate, and whether he should go after her for refusing to say radical Islamic terrorism. All right, Steve, you were almost in disbelief when you heard Jennifer Palmieri saying that one of their biggest fears is that they're going to tone down the questions for Trump.
The way she said it, look, both camps are going to be trying to do spin in advance of it. That's normal. We expect that. But that was just so patronizing, wasn't it? Just the way...
Intentionally so, though,
obviously. But I think it's a bit like the basket of deplorables. It reveals what they really think. I think they genuinely think he's just not very smart, not very clever, and just an idiot who doesn't understand anything about politics. And I think that that's part of the reason he's been underestimated by the political establishment for so long. But the thing I'd say about this debate and the preparation is that I think a lot of people in politics make the mistake of thinking that knowledge of policy and policy detail is the crucial thing. I think when
she's hoping for that.
Exactly.
I think that's what she's banking on.
Having worked alongside a prime minister and been in government, the truth is that you can have all the policy plans you want before an election, before getting into office. But once you're there, a huge part of the job is actually responding to unpredictable future things that come your way. And that's not about your policies. That's about your character, what you're like, your basic values. And in the end, I think that's what voters will be judging the candidates on, and to be honest, therefore, if he doesn't know all the details of every policy but comes across as the kind of person you want sitting in the Oval Office to deal with what the world may throw at America, I think that is what will be the crucial factor.
I also think that with Matt Lauer, her campaign got a win. And so what they're doing is they're setting up Lester Holt to repeat Matt Lauer's performance. And if they had known ahead of time that Matt Lauer was going to be tougher on Hillary Clinton, then she would have liked from NBC News, because it really hurt her feelings when he stepped on her pinky toes asking questions about the email server. They're hoping that Lester Holt does the exact same thing, which, you know, I can't imagine that he will. He's kind of
so,
style.
Steve, one thing that you kind of hit on the nail on the head with for me was that it's not about the policy, particularly when it comes to things that are unfolding right now, like terrorism in America. They want to know who is going to react first with what they're looking for that seems like leadership. Hillary Clinton has come at us with two different reactions to what happened over the weekend, and they were not exactly the same.
Yeah, you know, Monica Crowley wrote a great piece about the debate prep addressing that very question in the Washington Times, and she said rather than going back at Hillary Clinton, you know, on point about policy and getting trapped into, like you say, you know, sort of a fight on the details, he's better saying, we've tried it your way. I mean, this is your way.
Yeah.
This has not worked out. So if you want more of this and what's going on in the world, great. I'm going to try something different.
I mean, they are definitely managing expectations ahead of that debate. Do you think that's going to be a big turning point? This is the moment in the campaign?
It can be a turning point, and then you can turn back. I mean, if you look at some of the history, for example, I think Reagan in the 84 campaign had a disastrous first debate and turned it around in the second debate.
Same with President Obama in 2012 against Mitt Romney. He lost the first one, but then came back.
Terrible.
Yeah. All right. Well, the White House getting major pushback over its plan to increase the number of refugees coming into the United States starting next month. Now leaders in one state threatening to pull out of the refugee program amid growing security concerns. We'll have more on that just ahead.
Breaking news at the United Nations General Assembly. It's what we've been watching for after a contentious meeting reportedly with the President of the United States yesterday. Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, at the lectern at the UN. Let's watch.
Is going to shock you. Israel has a bright future at the UN. Now, I know that hearing that from me must surely come as a surprise, because year after year I've stood at this very podium and slammed the UN for its obsessive bias against Israel. And the UN deserved every scathing word for the disgrace of the General Assembly that last year passed 20 resolutions against the democratic state of Israel and a grand total of 3 resolutions against all the other countries on the planet. Israel 20, rest of the world 3. And what about the joke called the UN Human Rights Council, which each year condemns Israel more than all the countries of the world combined, as women are being systematically raped, murdered, sold into slavery across the world? Which is the only country that the UN's Commission on Women chose to condemn this year? Yep, you guessed it, Israel. Israel, where women fly fighter jets, lead major corporations, head universities, preside twice over the Supreme Court, and have served as Speaker of the Knesset and Prime Minister. And this circus continues at UNESCO. UNESCO, the UN body charged with preserving world heritage. Now, this is hard to believe, but UNESCO just denied the 4,000-year connection between the Jewish people and its holiest site, the Temple Mount. That's just as absurd as denying the connection between the Great Wall of China and China. Ladies and gentlemen, the UN, begun as a moral force, has become a moral farce. So when it comes to Israel at the UN, you'd probably think nothing will ever change, right? Well, think again. You see, everything will change, and a lot sooner than you think. The change will happen in this hall because back home, your governments are rapidly changing their attitudes towards Israel. And sooner or later, that's going to change the way you vote on Israel at the UN. More and more nations in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, more and more nations see Israel as a potent partner. A partner in fighting the terrorism of today, a partner in developing the technology of tomorrow. Today, Israel has diplomatic relations with over 160 countries. That's nearly double the number that we had when I served here as Israel's ambassador some 30 years ago. And those ties are getting broader and deeper every day. World leaders increasingly appreciate that Israel is a powerful country with one of the best intelligence services on earth because of our unmatched experience and proven capabilities in fighting terrorism. Many of your governments seek our help in keeping your country safe. Many also seek to benefit from Israel's ingenuity in agriculture, in health, in water, in cyber, and in the fusion of big data, connectivity, and artificial intelligence. That fusion that is changing our world in every way. You might consider this. Israel leads the world in recycling wastewater. We recycle about 90% of our wastewater. Now, how remarkable is that? Well, given that the next country on the list only recycles about 20% of its wastewater, Israel is a global water power. So if you have a thirsty world, and we do, there's no better ally than Israel. How about cybersecurity? That's an issue that affects everyone. Israel accounts for 0.1% of the world's population. Yet last year, we attracted some 20% of the global private investment in cybersecurity. I want you to digest that number. In cyber, Israel is punching a whopping 200 times above its weight. So Israel is also a global cyber power. If hackers are targeting your banks, your planes, your power grids, and just about everything else, Israel can offer indispensable help. Governments are changing their attitudes towards Israel because they know that Israel can help them protect their peoples, can help them feed them, can help them better their lives. This summer I had an unbelievable opportunity to see this change so vividly during an unforgettable visit to 4 African countries. This is the first visit to Africa by an Israeli prime minister in decades. Later today, I'll be meeting with leaders from 17 African countries. We'll discuss how Israeli technology can help them in their efforts to transform their countries. In Africa, things are changing. In China, India, Russia, Japan, attitudes towards Israel have changed as well. These powerful nations know that despite Israel's small size, it can make a big difference in many, many areas that are important to them. But now I'm going to surprise you even more. You see, the biggest change in attitudes towards Israel is taking place elsewhere. It's taking place in the Arab world. Our peace treaties with Egypt and Jordan continue to be anchors of stability in the volatile Middle East. But I have to tell you this. For the first time in my lifetime, many other states in the region recognize that Israel is not their enemy. They recognize that Israel is their ally. Our common enemies are Iran and ISIS. Our common goals are security, prosperity, and peace. I believe that in the years ahead, we will work together to achieve these goals, work together openly. So Israel's diplomatic relations are undergoing nothing less than a revolution. But in this revolution, we never forget that our most cherished alliance, our deepest friendship, is with the United States of America, the most powerful and the most generous nation on earth. Our unbreakable bond with the United States of America transcends parties and politics. It reflects, above all else, the overwhelming support for Israel among the American people, support which is at record highs and for which we are deeply grateful. The United Nations denounces Israel. The United States supports Israel.